Ask yourself, what's the most important mining city in Ontario? Sudbury? Timmins? Well, you could argue it's Toronto, where almost 60% of all publicly traded mining companies in the world are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange and the TSX-Venture Exchange. And while all that may be well known to those in the business world, it's far from widely appreciated beyond that. So let's find out more from Andrew Cheadle. He is Executive Director of the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada, known as PDAC. Sonny Freeman, Resources Reporter at the Financial Post. Joanne Kearney, Partner and Co-owner of Smithcom Limited, a strategic communications consulting firm. And Stan Sudol, Editor of The Republic of Mining. And it's good to have three new faces on the program tonight. Stan, good to see you again. Happy to have you back. Let me read this. Apologies to the journalist in the crowd here. This is from the competition. Here's from The Guardian, Sonny. Here's what you guys all know, but few others do. Unbeknownst to most of its residents, Toronto is a city built on mining. Nearly 75% of mining companies globally are headquartered in Canada, and almost 60% are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. In 2015, more than half of all capital investment in the mining business traveled through the exchange. In fact, few, if any, other capital markets around the world are as specialized in a single industry as Toronto is in mining. Okay, Andrew, we got to get to the bottom of this because this is going to be news to a lot of the people watching us right now. What makes the capital city of Ontario such a successful hub of mining interests?
It's the expertise that resides there and the Toronto Stock Exchange, where most of the money is raised.
That's a very short and simple answer, but why don't more people know this?
That is a very, very good question. And I think we don't celebrate the successes that we have in mining enough in Toronto and in Canada.
Stan, was there any particular event in history that made Toronto the mining hub it is today?
Absolutely. The 1903 discovery of silver at Cobalt initiated a huge boom that eventually funneled all mining, basically made mining securities move over to the Toronto Stock Exchange. Cobalt's mineral development spawned the Porcupine Gold Rush in Timmins in 1909, the Kirkland Lake Gold Rush in 1911, and basically had a connection with many of the major mineral discoveries across the country.
But it all started in cobalt.
Absolutely.
It all started there.
And then went on to your home in Sudbury, right?
Sudbury was a little bit different because it was discovered in 1883, but it was more American capital and American technology that developed the Sudbury camp. Whereas Cobalt, it was basically Canadian financing and knowledge.
Sonny, from your coverage of the industry, why do people outside the mining sector not understand how big a player Toronto actually is?
I think more and more, too, as people use technology, but we don't know exactly where the components of that are coming from. You know, we don't think about in our smartphone, that's all mined material in your smartphone. And we're so far removed from it. I think the other thing, too, is that as physical mines become more remote, further away from major cities, they're sort of literally out of sight, out of mind.
I would actually argue that most Canadians do know about the importance of the mining sector and are very supportive of it. That's especially true with those that work in the capital markets, and that ranges from bankers to lawyers to consultants. They have to deal with the markets every day and raise financing for the global companies. So I think they're the silent majority, though. And it is the minority that's not aware. And it would be great if we could do more to make them aware and to understand the significant contributions the sector does make.
Well, you're in the communications consulting business, so go to it. What's the pitch?
What's the pitch? Well, how do we make people more aware? I think we need to tell the good stories. I think we need to be more proactive in communicating what we're doing. A great example is I've been working on for the past 2 years a group of companies who are hoping to demonstrate how there's innovation happening in the mining sector. So that allowed us to communicate with people beyond mining. We were collaborating with technology sectors. We were taking notes from how are they so collaborative in what they're doing and applying it to our sector to demonstrate to the average Canadian, hey, this is an old industry, but there's some very cool stuff happening.
We're going to get to the innovation piece of it, but I do want to follow up on this. My hunch is when you ask most people, Sonny, about mining, they think first and foremost about environmental degradation. They don't necessarily think about the technology that's in their smartphone that mining enabled. What do they do about that?
Well, I think that's the thing, right? We're hearing, I think as people sort of become more globalized citizens and we're hearing more and more about what's happening in sort of far-flung areas of the world, the stories that are being told are those sort of negative stories, and people are sort of reacting to that. I think because it is sort of the minority of what's happening, when you hear about a leak or a spill or human rights abuses, that's actually not the majority of what's happening in the world. It's that, we are going about our day-to-day business using mined material and everything, and it's just, you don't think about that. It's not topical.
Is there a reason, Andrew, why Toronto, writ large, might not want to think of itself as a mining capital of the world?
I don't think there's a reason why they shouldn't. I think there's reasons why they should, quite simply because of the names that we have on the buildings that we see, whether it's the Monk Global School of Business, the Schulich schools, and of course the McEwen Regenerative Centre on University Avenue. The names are all over the city, but I don't think people actually realize where the money has come from and the charitable givings that have been made.
Well, you know what? I was going to get to this later, but we may as well go here now, guys. Control room, let's go to this. Here's Board 2, Philanthropic Endeavors. If anything, it is the mining sector's philanthropic endeavors that have a more discernible impact on Toronto's public spaces. Peter Monk, for instance, is arguably better known to the general public not as the founder of the world's largest gold mining company, but rather as the patron of the Peter Monk Cardiac Centre at the Toronto General Hospital and the Monk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. Stan, pick up on that. I mean, you look across the city and there are features of the mining business. The names are there, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And when you're looking at Peter Monk, you're looking since the 90s. He and his wife or family have donated over $185 million. Seymour Solch from closing in at almost $400 million in a variety of hospital and educational institutes. Ron McEwen, you're looking at in excess of $50 million. Most recently, $10 million to the architecture school in Toronto, and even
at Laurentian University.
Yes,
he gave $10 million bucks.
And even at Laurentian, Dave Harquell, who basically recently donated $10 million for the earth sciences. So you're seeing a lot of this money coming into universities and hospitals and other educational and cultural institutions, but people don't really connect with the mining industry.
I think it's important to also look what that money's doing, and it is having a global impact. For example, some of the money that's gone into UHN's Toronto General has enabled world's first in mechanical hearts and transplant technology that is increasing the number of lung transplants they do and the outcome for patients. So it's not just that they're giving dollars that are significant and transformational. They are funding the research and development phase that gets treatments to be reimbursable by OHIP and the standard of care. So without this philanthropy, which is, in this case, the Toronto General, disproportionate to the mining industry, our medical system wouldn't be where it is today. Well,
let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Some will argue that Peter Monk, for example, and the others are, giving this money, lots of money, as Stan has pointed out, to these public-spirited institutions in order to buy good publicity to sort of paper over some of the troubles they may have had in the mining world. True or false?
False.
Care to amplify?
Yeah, I actually know the individuals involved, and that is absolutely not their motivations.
Absolutely not. From a personal perspective, I actually have had a kidney transplant, and my husband, a CEO of a mining company, donated his kidney at the Toronto General, where it's the Eric Sprott Division of Surgery. So we've seen firsthand what not only the standard of care it is that's been enabled by philanthropy, but also the transformation that's happening in transplant medicine specifically, that have these aspirational goals that, as a patient, not as someone in the mining industry, I'm in awe of, that will only help my quality of life moving forward if they learn how to eliminate immunosuppressions. But they'll also learn how to grow new organs from stem cells. And where's that research happening? The McEwen Center for Regenerative Medicine.
On University Avenue in downtown Toronto.
Another leader donating another $20 million.
Yeah. Did you want to add?
I just wanted to add just a little bit. It goes beyond the medical, the global. The Canadian companies also lead the world in terms of corporate sustainable responsibility, advances in understanding how to mine responsibly, with respect, and building relationships with the communities. Canada is very much the leader on the world stage with that, and that takes mindset, it takes money, and it takes goodwill to do that.
I want to pick up on that, because my hunch is you walk down Yonge Street today, the first 10 people you ask, is mining an environmentally sustainable business? They're not going to say yes. Now, Is this a publicity problem or is this something else? What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because mining hasn't faced the same amount of disruption as some of these other industries that we've seen. It's just starting to come to that right now. So yeah, so I think what we're hearing about mainly when we hear about mining is because it is the most physical, like it's digging in the ground. It is by virtue the most sort of environmentally forward industry that there is out there. So I think that that's people's first thought is the effect on the environment. And I think that people don't really realize, that it's mainly associated with the environment. And again, when we hear negative things, that's actually the minority of what's happening, but it is what makes the headlines.
Stan, is mining, by its very basic nature, ruinous to the environment?
No. I just want to bring 2 points into it because we're talking about technology and we're jumping around, and I'll get back to the environment for a second. A good example, my friend up in Sudbury, Doug Morrison at the SEMI, the Research Institute, he succinctly put it, the Bank of Montreal building is 72 stories high. Some of the mines in Northern Ontario and Northwestern Quebec are the equivalent of 650 stories underground.
Yes.
That is astonishing. We're bringing our people down there. We're using sophisticated technological equipment to drill, blast, bring that valuable ore back up to the surface, make sure that their air is there, doing it the most economically and financially efficient way, and making money and producing enormous economic value for the economy, and producing the nickel, the copper, the cobalt, the platinum group metals, which are needed in the new generation of electric vehicles, which need battery type. Now back to the environmental.
How much is everyday routine mining injurious to the planet?
It depends if you're looking at open pit or you're looking at underground. The footprint of underground is that much less. But take a look at Sudbury, which was known as the moonscape of Ontario or Canada. You're looking at, from 1970 to now, the amount of sulfur dioxide coming out of the smelters has been reduced by 95%. And the talk in Sudbury right now is we've got to take down the iconic super stack because there's not enough pollution going up there to warrant its existence. The revegetation is world class. The UN has basically given awards to the city for the astonishing greening of the environment. You see that in Elliott Lake. You see that in all areas that have been mined, that there's a proponent to restore and revegetate the environment.
Let me put that to Andrew. If that's true, why, on first blush, when you ask people, is mining injurious to the planet, do they probably always say yes?
I think this is a legacy issue. There's no doubt when we look at the industry of our forefathers, there wasn't an environmental awareness. But these days, there really is a very, very strong environmental awareness. I'll recount for you my experiences at the Musselwhite mine, a gold corp mine in northern Ontario, about 500 kilometers north of Thunder Bay. That mine started rehabilitating the day it started mining.
How do you rehabilitate?
Well, as you mine, you have to sort of re-landscape. If you're taking cut in the ground, you green that over, you plant. And in the case of the Musselwhite mine, that is done in conjunction with the Indigenous people of that area. And that might lead me into another discussion about how we are the largest private sector employer of the Aboriginal Indigenous people of our nation, particularly in the north.
So you think you've got a good story to tell. Why isn't that story getting out?
I think we've done, to Joanne's comment here, we've done a superb job of talking to ourselves and amongst ourselves. I don't think we've done such a good job of talking with the general public. We need to have that dialogue, I think, with the public, that the mining industry is not what you think it is. And to quote our Minister of Natural Resources, the Honourable Jim Carr, this is no longer our grandfather's industry. It is a very modern, highly innovative industry.
It may well be that there's also a difference. If you were to go outside this studio and ask people on Yonge Street, what do you think of mining? They might think one thing. If you had this same conversation on Yonge Street where it hits Thunder Bay, you might have a very different opinion about it. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I think I've had the opportunity to visit many mining communities here in Ontario and across Canada. And when you go to northern Canada, and I mean quite far north of Sudbury, you quickly realize that mining companies are one of the only local employers. So I think they have a very favorable view, and they understand that the companies are committed to responsible resource development. And also we have to remember that the core priorities for these companies are to communicate with their employees and the local community, then to communicate with their investors who enable these projects, and then the stakeholders who govern the decisions. So they haven't prioritized the broader public because they want to make sure those constituencies are very engaged, and they are.
Sonny, do you have a sense about where the line is in Ontario, where if you're south of that line, you think of mining one way, but if you're north of that line, it's prosperity, it's jobs, it's resource, it's everything, right? Where's the line?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was just in Timmins, and there it is the community. One mining job creates 5 other jobs in a community like that. And people are spin-off jobs. And people are well aware of that. People, like teenagers, are doing internships at the mine. And they're going and seeing every day what the food that it puts on their tables and what their parents do for a living. And I just think it's so much more top of mind. It's more respected because it is physically closer to where they are. And I think that's going to be, it could be a problem going forward. The millennial kids in Timmins appreciate mining, but it's going to be hard to get millennials in, say, like a Toronto to actually want to go into that industry.
Unless they go into Bay Street. Then they'll understand mining.
A really great success story that came out very recently was Agnico Eagle's Meadowbank mine up in Baker Lake.
Where's Baker Lake?
In Nunavut territory. Sorry, it's way far north. It makes the Ring of Fire almost seem southern. Okay, and basically the small publication, there was a mining symposium, and they were gushing about the new Inuit middle class that was being created by Agnico Eagle's jobs. That there was not enough parking in Baker Lake because everyone had half-ton trucks. Music to my Sudbury ears, and that they were taking vacations in southern Canada. And that's what people are forgetting, that the resource industry is establishing a viable middle class, Indigenous middle class, whether it's Northern Valley's Voisey Bay or Glencore's Raglan in northern Quebec, the uranium mines in northern Saskatchewan, diamond mines in Northwest Territories, Musselwhite, like Andrew had mentioned, in the far northwest, or even Teck Cominco with their zinc deposits in northern Alaska. Enormous employer of Inuit in that state.
Okay, let me pick up on something, Joanne, you said a while ago, which was that there's a whole aspect of innovation to mining that people also don't appreciate. I was at a conference not too long ago where they talked about the country's first zero emissions mine. Now that sounds impossible to believe. But is that kind of stuff going on?
Absolutely. I think it's certainly a realistic target. And actually at Disrupt Mining, which was an initiative held by Goldcorp and Integra Gold during the PDAC this year, one of the 5 winners who shared a portion of $1 million was a biomine technology that uses an organism that can attack tailings in any jurisdiction with a goal to hit the elusive zero footprint goal. So there's actually technologies that are in development being funded by the mining industry that have that goal and are well on their way of getting there.
Andrew, can you help us understand that? How can you have a zero emissions mine where you're digging a mile down into the earth and you're not creating any pollution in doing so?
Yeah, let's look at the equipment that's used. There's been massive advances in battery technology. So instead of having diesel scoops or trucks underground, these are now electrical, they're battery operated. And obviously there's no emissions from those in the underground environment. Additional benefits, obviously, in terms of diesel particulate matter is no longer being put into the atmosphere, making the overall environment for the miners even healthier.
We are, how do I put this? This group of guests on our set today may not be, in terms of gender, reflective of the way it is in the industry. Sonny, is that fair to say? Is this still overwhelmingly a male-dominated sector of the economy?
Yeah, it definitely is.
Is there anything wrong with that?
Well, I mean, I think one thing is that if you go to very remote mines, fly in, fly out, it's very difficult for, if you think about, women are still largely responsible for raising children mainly, so it's very difficult for women to do the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and commute back and forth. But I know that also these innovations in technology, sort of remote operations, where you can literally sit in a chair and control a scoop underground. I know that some mining companies are saying that that is going to be sort of an avenue towards more diversity, because then people can be sitting in Montreal or Toronto and operating the scoop that's underground in the mine. So I think it's something that women don't really necessarily think about, even going into engineering, going into those programs. And I think that is definitely a problem that needs to be addressed.
Thanks for raising this subject, because it really is something we are very passionate about. So at the moment in the mining industry, it's about 17% female. 17%, which is a small improvement on the 12% of about 6 years ago. We do need to have a sort of catalytic event to become more sort of 50-50. There's huge efforts by the large mining companies, by the PDAC, to promote female involvement in the mining industry, whether it's Women Who Rock, Women in Mining. I sit on the board of Women in Mining International. We have to do better, and we will do better.
But it is absolutely happening.
Yeah.
Some of the most coveted board directors for the junior mining companies based in Toronto are women, because they're bringing a unique perspective, whether they're accountants previously or lawyers or whatever their expertise is. They're wanted on boards. And the CEO of Valley's operations here in Canada, one of the largest mining companies in the world, is a female, and she is breaking ceilings at that company and leading other women to do that too. So it's happening.
We've got women who are, especially in the exploration sector, like Catherine McLeod, who discovered an amazing deposit of gold in Latin America, and Ira Thomas, who was instrumental in discovering the diamond, one of the diamond.
Stornoway, yes.
Yeah, so it really is important to get that brain power in there, because you can't ignore half the brain power in society. And one of the most intellectually stimulating and challenging parts of mining is looking at the geology of countries and certain provinces and deciding where to put the drill hole. And the more highly intelligent people we have, male or female, in the industry, helps us find those new deposits for the 21st century.
How about attracting young people, Sunny?
That's what I think the problem is. That's what I was going to say. I think the problem is it's being identified as an issue that it's only 17% women working in the industry at the same time when there's fewer and fewer people going into the industry in general. I think there's a lot of, as I said, like engineer graduates. You don't think to go into working for a mine, which is better or at least equivalent money as working for a Google or an Apple, but you think about as an engineer, you want to go and sort of, work in like the tech sector. And I think a lot of industries are facing that problem right now, like financial sector is also facing that war for talent. And I think it's just, I think it's going to be a problem going forward.
Is the sector, I guess just finally, as sort of eye on the future, as forward thinking as it needs to be in 21st century Ontario?
I think we are. I think we've reached a point where we are very much looking towards 2035, the Sustainable Development Goals, how to provide the minerals and metals for a cleaner future, how to be more gender balanced, how to have relationships with Indigenous communities where we often operate. Yes, I think we have had a quiet revolution in the mining industry. The work's not finished. It will always be ongoing. It will always be a journey, but we have made some substantial advances.
Great. I want to thank all of you for coming in tonight and helping us out with this. Andrew Cheadle from PDAC and Joanne Kearney with a partner with Smithcom Limited. And then on the other side of the table, there's Sunny Freeman, I think maybe the only resources reporter in the country. She's with the Financial Post, and San Soudal from the Republic of Mining. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.